All right, so just a reminder, we're at the December Community Food Projects Community of Practice call, and we are walking through a 4-step action planning process today. We're going to record this walkthrough, and then we'll stop the recording once we get into the practice session so that we can have an informal conversation, but we're going to record this so we can share it with other people who couldn't be here today. So, what is this action planning process? Where did it come from? So it was first developed by the Institute of Cultural Affairs, ICA, and then I learned it as an adaptation from Steve Zweibeck of Synetics LLC. He has since passed into an ancestor, so just want to give him respect and honor for all the teachings that he brought to many, many people who learned facilitation practices from him in the 90s and the aughts, who's a really awesome dude. And I had the real honor of being able to learn from him in an intensive facilitation training back in 2007, I think it was. Um, this framework or tool is really useful for creating a very rapid action plan for a focused short-term strategy. So it's a really good thing to use for something that's pretty specific. It's not necessarily useful for like organizational strategy. So think about it as like an initiative or a project, something that you want to just be able to like bullet out some really quick and dirty steps with either individually or as a team, but not necessarily like a big, broad strategy kind of tool. Okay, so it's not necessarily for the overarching strategic planning, but it could be used for like components of an organization's strategic plan. And it can also just really create a sense of accomplishment in a short amount of time. So it's pretty straightforward. I'm going to walk through these pieces. So there's 4 steps, and I'm about to go through each one specifically. The first is the victory circle, and that's going to be kind of in the middle of the page. And that's where you identify your goals and intentions. What are the outcomes that you're aiming for with whatever this, strategy, initiative, project is? You then identify the key tensions, so the restraining patterns, the things that are getting in the way of you reaching your victory circle. You then do what's called a workshop method, and I'll go through what that looks like. So it's really brainstorming strategic elements and action steps. And then once you have those action steps, you basically put them into a sequence and you're able to outline the who, when, and how of the first phase of your action plan. So it's pretty straightforward and it's just got these 4 steps. So I'm going to go through each one of those and then we'll do an example. All right, so this is what it would look like. Victory circle is the thing in the middle. That's that desired future state, end result, what it is we want to see. Those arrows that are coming in, the challenges, paradoxes, problems, dilemmas. Yes, we'll share the slides, y'all. That is those key restraining patterns. Okay, so I'm going to get into these in more detail in just a minute, but I'm just kind of trying to give you a visual of what, if you were using a big, poster board, that's how you would kind of lay it out. So with the big circle in the middle, that's the victory circle. The arrows would be these key restraining patterns. And then action steps are basically put onto your Post-it notes, of which I have some somewhere around here, but you guys know what Post-it notes look like. Okay. So let's start with step 1, the victory circle. So the first step is, the team or you individually, you brainstorm the specific things you're going to see after the successful implementation of the strategy. So this is evidence that's charted in the middle of the victory circle, okay? That's like, what would you see? What would you hear? What would exist if you were successful? So you really kind of future cast. It would be like by, June 2025, there are, 5 gardens that are, flourishing with food. And like you get real specific in what you see happening. What is that
Oh,
desired
that's
future
right.
end state? The purpose
Makes
of
it
this
easier.
is if you're doing it particularly as a team, but also as an individual, is to get clarity and alignment about what it is that we're aiming to achieve. What is the outcome that we're aiming for? So, as a facilitation practice with your team, it can be really helpful to be able to identify if people aren't sharing the same picture in their minds of what it is that it's going to look like on the other side of this initiative or this practice. Um, let's see if there's anything else to say about this. I think, it's really like getting clear on this like evidence. I think, what is that outcome? What would it look like? What would the evidence of success be? Okay. So then part two. This is where you would identify those key tensions, which is the dilemmas, challenges, paradoxes, problems. These are all different names for the same thing. What is getting in the way of us achieving what we just described in our victory circle? Um, this could be so many different things. It could be we don't have enough funding to do it, limited resources. We've got some interpersonal challenges on our team that's, really getting in the way of us being able to achieve that victory circle. So just brainstorming, not judging, brainstorming. And I think, there's a place here too of, especially if you're facilitating this with your team, trying to get at some of the root causes underneath those tensions. So if it's we don't have enough resources, is what's underneath that? Is it that we actually don't have a fundraising strategy for the team? Or that we still haven't gotten our 501c3 and so we're not able to apply for the grants that we want. I'm just trying to give some examples, like try to get underneath some of the kind of higher level challenges or, problems, dilemmas, like try to unpack those a little bit and get at what's the root cause of those issues. Um, and you would just chart those around the victory circle. Okay. So, and I think it's really helpful to see them in these arrows too, because the visual really kind of, I think, helps, especially, maybe like visual learners and those of us that are maybe like kind of kinetic and thinking about these things as barriers or that are like getting in the way of us achieving that circle. It can be really helpful to actually see that visual on the paper. So then third is that, given what we're aiming for in the victory circle and these key challenges that are getting in the way, the team brainstorms action steps that would resolve the tensions to help us achieve the outcomes and evidences in the victory circle. So, being essentially, using some systems thinking here of like, how do we push through these restraining tensions and restraining patterns to still be able to achieve our ultimate goals? And, what steps would you take to break those tensions and get us to the goals in the victory circle? In this workshop method that I had mentioned previously, it's especially if you're doing this as a team, but it's also helpful if you're doing it individually, is to put one action step per sticky note. So don't like put a whole bunch of stuff that's all related into one sticky note. Put one idea or one action per sticky note. And then after you get them all out, just brainstorm without judging. You post those all up together. And if you're working with a group and you actually also individually, you can then organize and sort those action steps into themes and clusters. So, what are the different action steps that are related to each other? Group those together and then give them a name. So we'll do this in a minute with a practice set, but I hope y'all are kind of seeing like how this can help you to sort of just get the different steps out and then be able to cluster them into related things that then can be sequenced which is the final step of this. So step 4 is sequencing those action steps into a timeline. So, really it's something as simple as this grid, lay out a couple of quarters or whatever it is the timeline is that you're working on with this, whatever it is that you're trying to plan. What's the action step? So you pull those from the previous step, lay them out in a sequence, and then walk through. Who's going to do that? And what do we actually need to be able to pull it off? So, how any other like notes or resources that are needed, you can just put right underneath that. So one of the ways that I've done this is to put a big long spread of paper on the wall and put your timeline up and then put, over on the side, action step, who, and then the resources needed. And when you're using sticky notes, you can, really physically move things around and work together as a team to say, wait, does that go first or does this happen first? So the team can work together to lay out when things go in the sequence. And then, you get alignment around that. Is this good enough? And then say, okay, who's going to take on these different pieces? Overall, you can pull this off on, even a pretty like substantive issue in about an hour. It's meant to be fast. It's not meant to go into rabbit holes. So, that's something just to keep in mind um, as you work, as we work through this next thing of walking through each process or each step in the process. Um, it is kind of a high level plan that then you can go into much greater detail in work plans, in RACI charts, and what other kinds of, work planning and project management tools you might be using within your team. All right. So I'm gonna stop sharing for a minute.
Hi, Susan. Morning.
Hi.
Um, one thing that I think would be helpful on that little sheet, I'll just put my inexperienced 2 cents in, is how it will be measured. I'm
Ooh,
actually working on a 10-year food action plan right now for our region, and so that's a big piece of it, right? Like how are we going to measure the progress of it? When it comes to um, communicating to our community members and within our food council, and then more importantly to funders.
that's fantastic, Maria. And that also kind of brings it full circle back to the victory circle of the evidence of success. Like, how would you measure it? How would you know that you had reached that thing, that it had been completed? It really ought to link back to what had been described within that victory circle. It's a great addition. Thank you. And hey, Maria, thank you for modeling what this community of practice is all about, which is sharing our collective wisdom and knowledge. So just really want to invite others to add your 2 cents in here. So let's just take a minute to absorb that, ask questions, and then we'll walk through an example. So anybody, any initial reactions to this, questions? Don't be shy.
Well, sort of an offhand comment that I'd like to make is that you've really shown us that our work has value and is preserved even in face of the onslaught of artificial intelligence. There's nothing that you've described here that I think any one of the AI models could have done. So we get to do it.
We get to do it. That's a great point, John. Yeah, I don't know that ChatGPT would be able to just pull out what's in my brain without without something like this. And it's interesting because maybe the outputs of this process you could put into an AI tool and have it create a presentation of the plan or do something else. But it's like, you're right. I mean, we have to generate the ideas and the knowledge here and the strategy. And I actually really love that this is a really tactile tool. Like
Um,
I, as a facilitator and, just project management, whatever, I really love like using big sheets of paper and post-it notes. Like I don't know that that can ever really be recreated virtually.
and
Um,
we're thinking about adding a page to our website. We believe in AI, actual intelligence.
nice. Other reflections, questions? Yeah, I see Hester, also trying to make action steps smart. Yes, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. Always a good reminder about those. And I know, Andy, you had talked about SMART goals for the CFP grant. And I think that's always something that I think, particularly for our sector, um, we are a lot of optimists and we think big. And it's really helpful to like ground the vision in specificity, and giving it that, the time bound component and the achievable, measurable specificity. So thank you, Hester, for adding that in the mix.
I've heard a couple of nice additions to the SMART, to where it now says Smarty for inclusion and equity as well, which is a nice
Nice.
addition.
Yeah, thanks, Maria. Any other questions on the process? I'm just going to give a couple of quick tips. I had said this earlier, but it's definitely best used for smaller chunk size things, not like big, like we're going to launch the Regional Food Business Center, right? That's too big. But we are going to, develop the Business Builder Award program as part of that, something more specific, right? So something that it's like by June, we've got to get this RFP out or whatever for let's say you're wanting to produce a annual report. That's a good like kind of chunk of a project that you could use this 4-step action planning process for. Not great for like larger, broader organizational strategy. I'd add that it's also really helpful to have your existing organizational like values or guiding principles posted, and that your team and yourself are grounded in those guiding principles. And that you have them, like if you're doing this in a room with a team, that you have those visible, because it can also, be a reflection of like, how will we, let me reframe this. Um, Considering our key principles and values and the restraining patterns that we identified, what action steps can we take that will model our principles, resolve our tensions, and help us achieve the evidence of success described in the victory circle? I'll try and copy and paste that into the chat because it's a really good question as a facilitator or a team lead. So it's like, knowing that these are our guiding principles and our values, what can we do? What action steps can we take that will resolve the tensions and get us to that evidence of success in the victory circle?
So you had one interesting question in the chat about from Jen and Teresa. What do you recommend if there's disagreement on the action steps?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think that's why it is helpful if you're doing this as a team to, first brainstorm all the action steps. Okay. And whatever comes, each person can do their own. I'm going to brainstorm and I'm going to put one idea on each post-it. And then everybody goes up to the board and places all the ideas down. And then the next step, after everyone's ideas are up in a brainstorm, then you invite the room to organize them. And so without judging, people are putting them together in, what are the related things? Because oftentimes, you'll know within a team, 4 people are going to say the same thing. We need to do, well, we got to get the seeds or whatever. I mean, I'm just coming up with, random ideas, but like put all those, stack them together, right? And you put them in a cluster. And then if there's an outlier, it's like naming that. So there's an outlier here. It's a different idea than this one, and that's okay. But then you can also invite in a round of voting on action steps. So you could get stickers, stars, whatever. Everybody gets 10 stars. And it's like, y'all, this plan can only have 10 action steps. So put stars on the top 10 action steps. What is the priority? And then you can do, depending on what your team practices are and the culture in your organization, you could do a fist to five. Like, is there, if you're a five, you're just like fully on board with the 10 top action steps that were just identified through this process. And then if there's anyone who's like not on board, that means they're a 2 or a 1. That means that they are like, you're going to need to have a conversation about it. And that's where you got to tap into other facilitation practices that I don't know that we have the time to get into right now, but like being able to arrive at a place of consent in the team of like, we're all good enough with this process and what we've identified to be able to move forward, that we can like continue in the process. If you have that one person that isn't willing to move forward, then there's other facilitation practices that would need to be used to be able to like find a place of convergence and alignment around those action steps. Jen and Teresa, is that helpful, or do y'all want to reflect on anything that I just said?
That's super helpful. Yeah, I just really appreciate that the process of the organizing sort of brings out those kind of outliers automatically. So it doesn't create a situation where you have to say, okay, now we've got a disagreement. It like builds in discussion and consensus building around that. And I really like what you were saying about kind of numbering and then identifying those, like, that's where we've got to work on the ones and twos. So thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Susan,
Other-
I have a
Yeah, go ahead.
question.
Mhm.
Can you talk a little bit more about the lifespan of this effort where, it's paper, you put it up on the wall, and you said eventually we're going to have to get down to more detail and use other tools for that. But after it's created, does it become a living document in any regards where you might go back and because you have a different opinion than you had in that first hour of creating this? Can you just talk around that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I mean, and I'd invite other people to offer, your reflections on that question too. The way that I've done this with my team is that we do the victory circle, come up with all the ideas, do the sorting, like the naming of each of the kind of chunks of work, and the sequencing of those, and then going into who's going to do this and what are the resources, or like other just sort of, there's always something, some other thing that you want to make sure you get in there as you're doing this as a group. What we've done then is like somebody takes the what we've done on the wall and turns it into a work plan. And that would just be, we just use Excel for our work plans. But then we would come back in and that work plan becomes the living document. So that's then what we adjust. That's what we use as kind of our foundation. And then we always know that work plans are evolving and iterating as we're moving because the world is changing. Suddenly you've got a new grant opportunity. And so this other thing is going to have to pause while we take on this strategy. So it can be helpful to like go back to that work plan, and be able to iterate on it and adjust it as you go. And I think that's the part that becomes the living document. I hope that's helpful. I mean, I do think that the way that we use it is like with any of these work plans, it's like we'll revisit them at maybe the beginning of the month or a quarter, and then say, what do we need to change, based on how the world has changed, how the team has changed, how our resources have changed since we created this plan.
Thank you.
Susan or anyone else on the call, if you have some examples of decision-making matrix, that's something that we're starting to look at right now as we're developing our action plan, is like, how do we as a food council, as this large group of, varying personalities and, all sorts of other differences, when we come together, how do we make decisions on what will go on the action plan?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question and ask, Maria. And I've certainly got a couple of ideas there. So one that comes to mind is the seek maximum appropriate involvement shared decision-making framework from the Institute for what is it? Interaction Institute for Social Change. I can drop a link in the chat here shortly. about that one. But please, other folks, Fist to 5 is another really good one. But there's a lot of different strategies there for consensus building and consent building. So please, y'all drop those resources in the chat for Maria and everyone else. Let's walk through an example and then let's get into a practice round. Okay, wait, I gotta share my screen again. Where did that go? Uh-oh. Bear with me here for a second. Okay, you guys seeing this? We got Andy, can you see the slides?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So just a real quick one. So if what we're wanting to do, and this is something that Andy and I and others are working on, is creating a dynamic, diverse, active participation in the 2025 Community Food Systems Conference, which will be in June in Portland. Little plug. So, if that's what we're trying to do, thinking about, dynamic, diverse, and active participation. I want to get really specific here. What would we see? So I'm just throwing ideas here, and this is just an example, but like on the morning, see how I'm getting very specific on a time-bound thing of evidence. On the opening morning of the conference, we would see at least 400 people from all over the US. We'd see racial diversity in the room. We'd see young people and elders in the room. And we'd see a room that's buzzing with conversation and laughter. So I'm getting that those are like the evidence of success. Okay, we would actually see that. And I'm visualizing it right now, and it gets me excited about being there. So then, what are some of the constraints? What might get in the way of us being able to have that experience on the opening morning of the conference? Well, people that are there, they don't know each other. So we can't just assume that people would show up in a room and be laughing together and talking and right off the bat, right? Folks don't know each other and people have different styles of connection. Maybe the plenary space, I made this up, and Andy, I don't know if it's true or not, but I'm just like, it's cold and cramped. Like, it's just not an ideal space that's gonna create this condition. So that's a constraint. We want to name these constraints. We also know that, it's expensive to go to conferences. And so to make sure that we, particularly to get young people and elders in our movement who might be living on a, limited income, how are we going to get them there? They may not be able to pay to attend. And then also we know there's a lot of conferences in 2025. And so, there's some stiff competition for folks' attention and time and energy and resources. So that's a constraint. That's a barrier to, hitting our registration targets, et cetera. So then, after being able to name some of those, we can just start brainstorming ideas. Let's get, specific funding and scholarships for youth and elders to attend. That's one idea. Let's encourage or incentivize delegations from different parts of the country or different sectors, like a community food projects delegation to the conference. We could create a vibes team or a welcoming committee so that there's somebodies who have that distinct hat on to welcome people, to get people talking to each other, to weave connections in the conference. We could secure a cool location, blah, blah, blah. You guys get the idea. So what the brainstorm was how do we address the key tensions to get to the evidence in the victory circle? The next step then, as we had talked about, is we would then take these, we'd sort them, and then we'd sequence them. And then go into the who's going to do it and the, any other resources. And then to Maria's point, what's the indicator that that's been done? Maybe it's a milestone or an output that we'd know that task had been achieved. Really, kind of a silly example, but hopefully gives a little bit of a sense of what this would look like. All right. Questions, comments based on that example? Let's do a practice round. All right. So get yourself, a piece of paper or something. And I'm just gonna kind of play along with my big old chart here. And I need a marker. I like using different colors, like, the victory circle being in green in the middle. So, draw yourself a big circle in the middle of your page or whatever you're using, and write out what specific. So hopefully all of you have something in mind that you want to like kind of work through right now. Anybody want to just shout it out? Actually, you know what? Sorry. I'm going to stop the recording now. Andy, you might have to do that.